Let me tell you about the Russian Civil War. This was the largest internal conflict in European history, both by the number of people involved and the geographic scope of the fighting. From the Vistula River in the west to the Urals in the east and beyond, battles were fought for the future of Eastern Europe. The outcome of that struggle would decide the history of the region for most of the 20th century. Our story begins in the northeast of Europe in the latter stage of the First World War. The war had lasted for several years, and the burden of sustaining it weakened the Russian state internally. It made it so weak that it was unable to suppress the factions within the country. One of these factions were the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks were a radical party that wanted to launch a communist revolution. They formed a coalition with like-minded parties, which we will call the Reds. In order to achieve these goals, the Reds had very few forces. But the Russian state had by that time become so weak that Red forces had the upper hand. Russia's capital was the city of Petrograd. The Reds' main supporters were the industrial workers, many of whom were concentrated in the city, where the Reds had 40,000 worker militiamen. The forces loyal to the Russian government were negligible. It had lost its support, and few people were willing to fight for it. The Reds took control over Petrograd without much fighting. A large obstacle for the Reds was the Russian army, which was at the time fighting against the Central Powers. In order to overcome this threat, the Reds signed a truce with the Central Powers and ordered the Russian army to be disbanded. The soldiers were tired of the war and gladly went home. Most of the autonomous regions of Russia did not submit to the Reds. The Reds decided to make them submit using their military force. The Reds' military force consisted of 180,000 worker militiamen dispersed among the towns of Russia and a number of soldiers of the Russian army that had joined their side. In the south of the former Russian Empire were the territories of the Cossacks. The lands of the Cossacks were divided into several sub-regions. Most of the Cossack forces had just returned from the front and did not want to fight against the Reds. In the land of the two eastern Cossack territories, the leaders attempted to rally the Cossack soldiers against the Reds, but most of the Cossacks did not follow them. The Red militias were able to suppress the resistance and occupy these Cossack regions. In the lands of the Astrakhan, the Cossacks could put up a stronger resistance, but the Red militias defeated them in the town of Astrakhan and took control over the region. The most dangerous Cossack territory for the Reds was that of the Don Cossacks. The Reds had strong militias nearby. They had 15,000 militiamen in the Donbas coal mining region. The Reds could use them to attack the Don Cossacks. But before the Reds could do that, they had to establish lines of communication through the territory of the Ukrainian People's Republic. The Ukrainian People's Republic, or UPR, wanted to resist the Reds, and it had created an army of 53,000 men from the soldiers of the old Russian army. However, due to the Reds ordering the demobilization, the forces of the Ukrainian People's Republic were dispersed in many locations inside the country, and most of them did not want to resist the Reds. The Reds had 34,000 worker militiamen in the towns of the Ukrainian People's Republic, which gave them a strong advantage in the south and east of the country. The Red militias established control over Kharkiv without resistance from the UPR forces. Further south, they ran into some resistance from the Ukrainian People's Republic's troops, but eventually overcame them. They then approached the town of Katerinoslav. The Red militiamen and soldiers outnumbered the loyalist Ukrainian People's Republic's forces in the city. They defeated the UPR forces and took over the region. A few of the UPR forces had remained in the southeast Ukrainian People's Republic by that time, but they now surrendered to the Reds. The Reds set out to complete their main objective and defeat the White forces and the Cossacks. The White Cossacks were by that time in control over the three regions of Don, Kuban, and Terek. The main resistance was concentrated in the lands of the Don Cossacks. The former command of the Russian army was gathering a new army in this territory to fight the Reds. They called it the Volunteer Army. By early January, it consisted of 2,000 soldiers. They were supported by 15,000 Don Cossacks. The Reds had by that time increased their forces in the region to 31,000 troops. The Cossacks did not want to fight the Reds, and when the Reds attacked, their forces began to disintegrate. After a month of fighting, the Don Cossacks' army disintegrated and they had only 2,000 troops left. These Cossacks joined the volunteer army and left the Don region. The Don Cossacks' army ceased to exist. South of the Don Cossacks were the Kuban Cossacks. The Kuban Cossacks put up even less resistance. A small Red force advanced from the coast of the Black Sea and occupied their capital at Yekaterinodar, after which the Reds then established control over the Kuban region. The volunteer army attempted to retreat, but it was now pursued by the Red forces. By the end of March, the Reds had blocked the volunteer army's path at Yekaterinodar with a strong force of 18,000 soldiers. The volunteer army had 4,000 troops. With these odds, the volunteer army could do little to defeat the Reds. The Terek Cossacks also acknowledged the Reds' authority. By the middle of March, the Reds' campaign against the Cossacks had been mostly a success. They had subjugated the Cossack regions and surrounded the volunteer army with superior forces. The following events in the lands of the Cossacks would be outside of the time scope of this video. We will now look at the area further west. This region was divided between several autonomous regions. Many soldiers of the old Russian army who were located near the front line supported the Reds' policy of disbanding the army and helped them in taking power. The Reds took control over the region near the front line. Near the Black Sea coast of the Ukrainian People's Republic, the Red militias took power in the large cities. With the Ukrainian People's Republic weakened, the Reds set out to defeat it completely and put an end to the UPR. They decided to attack and occupy Kyiv, its capital. In eastern Ukraine, the Ukrainian People's Republic had a formidable force of 7,700 soldiers against the Reds' 9,400. Most of the Ukrainian People's Republic forces had very low morale and did not resist. First, the Reds secured Poltava and dispersed the Ukrainian People's Republic forces there. Another force took undefended Ohturka and weakly defended Sumy. Near Konotop, it then made contact with the best units of the Ukrainian People's Republic. But these forces could only delay the Reds' advance towards Kyiv. The Reds fought the UPR forces near Konotop. Another battle was fought in Bakhmach. Third battle was fought near Nizhyn. As the Red forces approached Kyiv, the worker militias in the city revolted against the Ukrainian People's Republic, and the UPR resistance in the east of the city collapsed, because all UPR forces were redeployed to the capital. As the street battles were fought in Kyiv, the Red forces approached from the east. The Ukrainian People's Republic prevailed over the rebellion, but now had to fight against the Red forces coming from the east. Kyiv had a strong garrison, but out of 12,000 soldiers, only 1,500 decided to resist the Reds. The rest of the city's garrison declared neutrality. The Reds had 7,000 troops. After heavy fighting, the Reds took the city by storm. The UPR forces in western Ukraine had by that time mostly disbanded themselves, and with the fall of Kyiv to the Reds, the coordinated resistance by the Ukrainian People's Republic's forces ended. With the UPR resistance greatly weakened, the Reds forces occupied the most important towns of the Ukrainian People's Republic. The Reds' campaign in the Ukrainian People's Republic had been a success. By that time, Romania had entered into conflict with the Reds. While the Reds had ordered the Russian army to be disbanded, Romania still maintained its armed forces. By that time, they numbered somewhere under 400,000 soldiers. Most of the people in the Moldavian People's Republic spoke Romanian. With the Red forces taking over the Moldavian People's Republic, Romania decided to join this territory with itself. Romania deployed 50,000 soldiers of its army for this operation. The Romanian forces invaded the Moldavian People's Republic and soon took most of it under their control. The Reds had to redeploy their forces from under Kyiv to counter the Romanian advance. The Red and Romanian forces fought, but neither side could achieve a decisive result before the end of the time scope of this video. This is because a major event would bring the fighting in Eastern Europe to a new phase. The Central Powers forces intervened in the fighting in the Russian Civil War. The truce that the Reds had signed with the Central Powers was only temporary, And now, on February 18th, 1918, their armies launched a major offensive on the Eastern Front. We will cover it in the next episode of the Russian Civil War.